Megaman A, the A standing for Ancient, or Rockman Antique as it's known in Japan, is a minigame you unlock in ZX Advent by beating the game. It's an 8-bit platformer based on the classic series. You may be wondering why I'm making a video on it, but there's a surprising amount of substance to this would-be simple minigame. Something that may come to a surprise to you is that this minigame was cited as the start of Mega Man 9's development, with Ippo Yamada, a sound designer of both games, saying during an interview in the Rockman 9 album. So let's start off by talking about the Rockman Antique minigame in Mega Man ZX Advent, which was the start of this whole grand Mega Man 9 adventure, with Shinichi Sima, a programmer for both games, following up, stating, "When we were making ZX Advent, we didn't have the faintest idea that we'd one day be working on Mega Man 9. Actually, Mega Man 9 wasn't originally going to be released on the Wii. We were going to develop it using the Wii development environment and tools, and then finish it and release it for the DS. However, this plan sadly fell through, as the DS's screen size is actually smaller than that of the original NES. If you want to read the full interview, please look in the description, and thank you once again to shmupulations.com for the translation." Lastly, before I start talking about the minigame itself, it actually has its own track in the ZX Advent Tunes album, named Rockman Antique Remix, that's actually playing in the background now. Moving on to the minigame now, while both Ash and Gray are playable, you can't choose between them in the traditional sense. Instead, who you play as is actually dependent on the day you play the minigame. If you play on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, you'll play as Ash, while on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, you'll play as Gray. It's a 50-50 chance on who you'll play as on Sunday. Secondly, the sprites for both Gray and Ash are very clearly edits of Mega Man's original sprite, and they don't just stop at their looks, they also play like Mega Man, specifically from Mega Man 3. They have the slide, but lack the charge shot. The minigame has 3 stages. The first is an 8-bit version of Area A from the original ZX, of course being the easiest stage, with the biggest challenge being the spikes and this relatively easy platforming section. The enemies that show up in this stage are Krika-Leaps, Galleon Hunters, and Karams, all of which actually showing up in Area A of ZX. Overall, it's a pretty short and easy stage to get you ready for what's next to come. To be completely honest, I'm not sure on what the second stage is based off of. This stage ramps up the difficulty quite a bit, with some tighter jumps and the reintroduction of disappearing blocks, everyone's favorite gimmick. The stage is just a little bit longer than the first stage, and actually has an extra life that you can grab if you need it. The stage introduces 2 new enemies to the mix, those being the cutting gyros and the classic Mets, alongside the returning Galleon Hunters. The second stage has a bit of a jump in difficulty from the first stage, but it's not too bad. The last stage is based on the Ouroboros, which is apparent thanks to the Model W that makes up the background. The final stage, to me at least, is the perfect difficulty. While it doesn't introduce any new gimmicks, it brings back all the enemies, placing them in positions that make you plan out your next move before acting brashly, and brings the disappearing blocks back, with one section of the blocks being particularly longer, but easy once you set your nerves straight. The stage is also just right in its length, being longer than the first 2 stages, yet having almost no dull moments. The only new things the stage introduces are the Machios and the cannons from Mega Man 3. While playing through the stages, an 8-bit arrangement of green grass Gradiation can be heard. I kinda wish they made 8-bit arrangements for each stage individually, but it's still pretty neat nonetheless. All in all, the 3 stages are pretty nice, almost perfectly spreading out the difficulty. Each of the 3 stages have a boss, that being Master Albert. In the first encounter, Albert will make lunges at the player, and then land on the left or right side of the screen. He will then shoot his diamond-shaped projectiles, with the orange ones bouncing off the wall, while the blue stick to it, coming back to him once the attack is over. Albert has little to no invincibility frames, and you can easily get behind him in this fight, ending it rather quickly. This is definitely the easiest of his 3 fights. Speaking of all 3 of his fights, Rock On, ZX's boss theme, got an 8-bit touch-up for this minigame. On to the second fight against Albert. I actually find it the most difficult of his encounters. Albert has a new attack, where instead of throwing them on the ground, he hurls his projectiles at you from an unreachable distance, with the same rule applying about their colors. It wouldn't be difficult to dodge, but the spike pit in the middle actually complicates things more than you'd know without playing yourself, which even makes getting behind him a difficult task. Honestly, I find this to be a pretty challenging and difficult fight, but not impossible. Lastly, the final battle has Albert in a capsule that functions just like Wily's in Mega Man 7, with the same attack pattern of creating 4 spears that chase after the player into electric spears that when hitting the ground, split into 4 separate floor hazards. Honestly, this fight is ridiculously easy compared to the second battle, and even more so to the actual Wily capsule. After beating him, he even apologizes like Wily, while you're congratulated. However, this isn't the end. If you were able to collect all of the boss medals, a test of patience more than it is skill, oh my god, when you start a new save file and get Model A, you'll be able to do this. You can now play as Ash and Gray's 8-bit sprite in the actual game. They can slide, wall kick, and shoot lemons. Because of their small stature, they're able to access areas where you'd usually have to crawl or use head shock in. Platforming in this form is also somewhat difficult, as they don't have a dash jump since they don't have a dash. And fighting anything with a lot of health is really annoying because you only do 1 damage in this form. If you were to ask me if it's worth it, I'm honestly not even sure really. Lastly, the first stage, its boss, and the final boss of Mega Man A appears as the last secret stage of Z Chaser, with the completion time for the hardest difficulty being 1 minute 10 seconds. While it may seem impossible, with a little luck and by copying the movements of the ghost, you can beat it. You win! Thanks for watching and sticking around this long. I really appreciate it. Peace.